Well, that was no good. My goodness, the Cowboys just got absolutely throttled by the Colts in every conceivable fashion. And it's fine, the Colts have been on a tremendous run recently, and they're probably going to barely make the playoffs, but also, like, the Jaguars beat them 6-0 2 weeks ago. So now let's look away from that disaster and let's look ahead. This is Know Your Opponent after all. How will the Cowboys respond after the shutout loss? This week, the Cowboys play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Dallas. The Bucs are 5-9, and they've won one road game this season, which was back in Week 1 at the Saints, which remains the most bizarre result of the season in retrospect. But eventually, the Fitzmagic died out, and now the team is pretty much just Mike Evans making Jameis Winston look semi-competent. Last week, the Buccaneers put up 241 yards of total offense against the Ravens, which is, not very good. Now, Baltimore does have a solid defense, but those numbers would have been embarrassing back in the leather helmet days. And of the Buccaneers' 157 yards of passing, 121 went to Mike Evans. Also, incredibly, 64 of those yards came on the same play. A really nice play for what it's worth. Jameis Winston looked like a slow-motion Patrick Mahomes, which I think is almost a compliment. But unfortunately for them, the comparisons to an MVP caliber quarterback definitely end there. Jameis averaged 6.3 yards per pass attempt compared to Lamar Jackson's 5.7 last week, ending up with very similar stat lines, except for the fact that Lamar Jackson also ran for 95 yards on 18 carries. Listen, I don't know if Lamar Jackson's going to take the Ravens to the promised land, but I do know that Jameis isn't getting the Bucs there. Plus, his supporting cast is not great. Peyton Barber, yet another undrafted free agent running back starting in the NFL, is the Buccaneers' leading rusher on the season with a totally inoffensive and totally uninspiring 202 carries for 762 yards and 5 touchdowns this year, averaging 54 yards per game. He's fine, and he's probably available in some of your fantasy leagues. Speaking of fantasy leagues, Deshaun Jackson, he's available everywhere because he's missed 3 games with a thumb injury, and he may or may not play, and you may be able to tell how I feel about that by the tone of my voice at this point. I don't care. It doesn't really matter. And Cameron Brate catches touchdowns sometimes, so he's probably on one of your 75 fantasy rosters, but isn't changing this game in any conceivable fashion, not in a real way at least. Now defensively, the Bucs have improved over the last few weeks, which is kind of surprising considering their start. After allowing 38 points to the Giants a few weeks ago, they only gave up 9 to the 49ers, 17 to the Panthers, 28 to the Saints, which is pretty good for the Saints, and 20 to the Ravens. Jason Pierre-Paul and Gerald McCoy are the 2 names across that defensive line that you'll recognize, and they're both playing pretty well this year. McCoy has 6 sacks in the 12 games that he's played in, not a bad number at all for an interior defensive lineman, and JPP has 11.5 sacks playing in all 14 games. I'd consider that defensive line a relative strength at this point for this team. So, what's the plan for the Cowboys? Just play better than you did against the Colts. The Ravens ran all over Tampa Bay last week with Lamar Jackson and Gus Edwards. Now, Dak won't run like Lamar Jackson, obviously, but Gus Edwards isn't quite Ezekiel Elliott. Get back to Amari Cooper. That's mandatory. Score early, be aggressive. It's not that hard, but I think that's what the Cowboys need to do. And I'm worried about Jason Garrett slow rolling this one a little bit. Taking field goals on 4th and 1 in the red zone, punting at midfield, that kind of thing. Because if Jameis and Mike Evans connect a few times in this game, the Bucs are going to make it hard for the Cowboys to play catch-up. If they can make Dak really work and hang out in the pocket for a little while, eventually that pass rush is going to get there. That's the one thing that I'm a little bit nervous about. Now, if Dallas gets an early lead, they can make Jameis force some risky throws and then grind the game out on the ground with high-percentage Dak to Cooper passes and, of course, Ezekiel Elliott to keep the offense on the field. Even after last week, I think, honestly, the Cowboys could start the game by spotting the Buccaneers 10 or 14 points and still come back and win. But, I mean, it'd be better if they didn't. I'm Joshua Brisco, and this has been Know Your Opponent, only on Phantom.